The bitter cold bit through every layer of clothing as the B-17 climbed higher into the October sky. 30,000 feet above the North Sea, the world had turned crystalline and hostile. Ice formed on the windows, breath froze in the gun turrets, and high above the formation, danger circled like a hawk searching for weakness. The young gunner's fingers gripped the ice-cold metal of his .50 caliber machine gun, feeling the bite of frost even through his gloves. His breathing came shallow and rapid, fogging his goggles. 200 yards away, sleek and deadly, a Messerschmitt 109 cut through the formation with terrifying speed. The German pilot had spotted his opening. The attack was coming. What should have been simple instinct screamed at him to do one thing: line up the sights directly on that enemy fighter, squeeze the trigger, and watch it fall. Every hunting trip from his childhood, every shooting lesson, every fiber of his being demanded he aim straight at his target. That was how you killed things. That was common sense, but he didn't. His hands moved instead toward empty sky, positioning his gun 6 aircraft lengths behind the diving fighter, between the Messerschmitt and his own bomber's tail. The gun bucked and roared to life. Fire lanced from the barrel into the frigid air. 2 seconds later, the German fighter transformed into a ball of orange fire. It disintegrated across the sky in a shower of burning wreckage. The gunner had just discovered a truth that seemed to mock everything he thought he understood about shooting. When you aimed directly at a target moving past you at 300 miles per hour, while you yourself were moving through the sky at the same speed, you missed. Every single time. The secret was something far stranger. You had to aim where the target had already been. This wasn't luck or accident. It was mathematics. It was physics. It was the result of a training revolution that had begun 3 years earlier in the most unlikely place on Earth. The winter wind howled across the Nevada desert as Colonel Martinez stepped out of his vehicle. The date was January 25, 1941. The location was barely a location at all. 60 square miles of absolute emptiness stretched in every direction. Creosote bushes scratched and rattled in the breeze. Jackrabbits bolted at the sound of his approach. Sand drifted across everything, endless and featureless, under a pale sky that promised nothing but more cold. Someone had told him this wasteland would become the most critical gunnery school the American military had ever built. He looked around and wondered if they'd lost their minds. The problem was straightforward and terrifying in equal measure. The United States Army Air Corps possessed exactly 0 dedicated facilities for teaching men how to shoot from the sky. There were no schools. There was no curriculum. There was no proven method for transforming farm boys and factory workers into precision marksmen who could defend multi-million-dollar bombers traveling at speeds previously unimaginable, while enemy fighters attacked from every direction at 300 miles per hour. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The entire American strategic bombing campaign depended on solving this problem before it even started. The new heavy bombers rolling off assembly lines were technological marvels. The B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator carried up to 13 .50 caliber machine guns bristling from every angle. On paper, they should have been nearly impregnable, but guns meant nothing without the men behind them. And as of early 1941, those men didn't exist. The British had learned this lesson in blood and fire. Royal Air Force bomber crews had been flying missions over Germany in darkness, expecting their defensive gunners to protect them. Instead, the crews kept disappearing. Luftwaffe fighters pounced on them night after night, and the British gunners, trained for ground targets and stationary practice, were helpless. They aimed directly at the attacking fighters, using every instinct they possessed. They missed. Their crews died. The American military was absolutely determined not to repeat that nightmare. On January 25, 1941, the Army Air Corps signed a lease. They would rent 60,000 acres of Nevada desert from the city of Las Vegas for $1 per year. It was a bargain for both sides. Work crews arrived in March and transformed the barren landscape into something that resembled a military installation. Barracks rose from the sand. Classrooms materialized where coyotes had hunted. Hangars and firing ranges appeared like monuments to American determination. By June, 103 instructors reported for duty. Men who had to figure out, from scratch, how to teach skills that nobody in America fully understood. Then came December the 7th, 1941. Japan struck Pearl Harbor. Everything changed overnight. On December 9th, 2 days after the attack, the Chief of the Army Air Corps issued immediate orders. Aerial gunnery training would begin at once. The base was officially activated on December 20th. Weeks later, the first recruits arrived at Las Vegas Army Airfield, young men with no idea they were about to learn how to change the nature of aerial warfare. The training started basic and fundamental. Instructors mounted shotguns on fixed platforms and positioned students in front of them. Clay pigeons flew into the air at various angles, and the students fired away. It was straightforward. The theory was sound. Skeet shooting taught the principles of leading a moving target, of aiming ahead to intersect the path of something traveling perpendicular to your line of sight. The physics was ancient and simple. A duck flying left to right meant you aimed ahead of it. Your pellets and the duck would arrive at the same spot simultaneously. The students learned quickly. Most hit their targets. Then came the real surprise. The instructors bolted the shotguns to the backs of moving trucks. Suddenly, impossibly, everything fell apart. As the trucks rumbled and bounced across the desert, the same students who had been hitting clay pigeons now couldn't hit anything. Targets they should have shredded sailed past untouched. The instructors watched in frustration as the young men applied everything they'd been taught and failed again and again. Confusion rippled through the ranks. These men were doing exactly what they'd been instructed to do. They were leading their targets. They were aiming ahead. They should have been hitting everything. Why were they missing so completely? The answer emerged from a principle so backward, so contrary to everything human instinct demanded, that even experienced instructors struggled to put it into words. When you stand still and shoot at a moving target, you aim ahead. But when you're moving and your target is also moving, the entire equation flips upside down. Sergeant Robert Hayes stepped in front of a class of frustrated, bewildered trainees. He was from Texas, with a background in physics, and he drew a simple diagram on the blackboard. A bomber traveling 300 miles per hour. A German fighter approaching from the side at matching speed. A bullet fired from a gun mounted on that bomber. The students naturally assumed the bullet traveled straight from the gun to wherever their sights pointed. They were absolutely wrong. The instant a bullet left the barrel, it inherited the bomber's forward velocity. Every round fired from that gun was already traveling 300 miles per hour forward, in addition to whatever additional speed the gun itself provided. This meant a bullet fired 90 degrees to the side didn't actually travel to the side. It traveled diagonally, pushed forward by the bomber's momentum even as it moved away from the gun. The faster the bomber flew, the more dramatic this effect became. At 300 miles per hour, a bullet fired perpendicular to the direction of travel would curve forward like a baseball pitcher's curveball, except far more extreme. The trajectory was completely altered by the aircraft's motion. Sergeant Hayes pulled out a piece of string and attached a weight to it, creating a simple pendulum. He walked forward while letting the weight swing freely. The students watched, and their minds finally began to shift. The weight didn't hang straight down as they expected. It angled backward, pulled by the forward motion of Hayes's body. Release that weight while walking, and it doesn't drop straight down, he explained. It carries forward with you, following your momentum. Your bullets work exactly the same way. The implications were staggering and humbling. If a German fighter attacked from directly to the side, flying a perfect 90-degree angle to the bomber's path, and a gunner aimed directly at that fighter, the bullet would curve forward and sail harmlessly past the target. The bomber's own speed guaranteed a miss. To actually hit something directly to the side, you had to aim behind it, sometimes way behind it. The exact distance depended on the angle of attack, the speed of both aircraft, and how far away the target was. But the core principle remained constant and absolutely violated everything human instinct screamed. The British had discovered this truth through horrific trial and error, watching their crews die over German skies until someone finally figured out what was happening. They called their solution the zone system, dividing the defensive sphere around a bomber into different zones, each requiring different aiming techniques based on where the attacker was coming from. The Americans studied the British approach and refined it further. eventually developing what they called position firing. This technique was based on a critical observation about how fighters actually attacked bombers. To bring their forward-firing guns to bear, enemy fighters had to fly pursuit curves, continuous arcing paths through the sky that kept their weapons pointed at the bomber. From the gunner's perspective inside the bomber, an attacking fighter appeared to slide sideways toward the tail, while simultaneously growing larger as it closed the distance. This created a geometric relationship that could be calculated and measured. The fighter's angle to the bomber's nose and tail, combined with the bomber's speed and the bullet's velocity, determined exactly where the gunner needed to aim. The Army Air Force developed tables and charts and eventually a simple rule system based on something called radians of deflection. A radian was an angular measurement that told gunners precisely how far behind the attacking fighter to aim. At a 90-degree attack angle, with both aircraft traveling at typical combat speeds, a gunner might need to aim 8 to 12 radians behind the fighter. Each radian represented a specific angular distance, roughly equivalent to one aircraft length at combat ranges. This meant aiming 8 to 12 full aircraft lengths behind an attacking fighter to actually score a hit. Every principle from the gunner's childhood, every lesson from hunting trips, every survival instinct from target shooting, screamed that this was absolute madness. But mathematics didn't care about instincts. Physics didn't negotiate with gut feelings. By summer 1942, Las Vegas Army Airfield was graduating 600 gunners every 5 weeks. The training had evolved into a comprehensive 6-week program that systematically dismantled students' natural shooting instincts and rebuilt them completely from the ground up using position firing principles. Week 1 was ground school. Ballistics and aircraft recognition and detailed mechanical knowledge of the .50 caliber Browning machine gun. Students learned to field strip and reassemble their weapons in complete darkness, preparing for the freezing, cramped reality of gun positions in actual combat. Week 2 moved students to the shotgun trucks. They spent hour after hour shooting at clay pigeons from moving platforms, forcing their bodies and minds to adjust to shooting while in motion. Instructors gradually increased the speeds, pushing students to adjust their aim points further and further behind the targets. Their instincts screamed at them. They ignored the screaming and kept adjusting. Week 3 introduced the manipulation trainers. These were towers that rose 10 to 40 feet into the desert air, arranged like a bomber formation. Students sat in mock turrets with guns that tracked dummies pulled on wires through the sky. No live ammunition yet, just the endless repetition of keeping a gun sight on a moving target while compensating for the bomber's motion through space. Week 4 brought the Warbler Gunnery trainer. Students entered a darkened room and fired at fighter images projected onto a large concave screen. The images dove and weaved and attacked from every angle. Students tracked and fired while the trainer recorded every trigger pull, every hit and miss. The machine could simulate any angle of attack, any speed, any scenario imaginable. Students saw their mistakes instantly, learned from them, and tried again. The repetition burned proper technique deep into muscle memory. Week 5 was the moment of truth. Students climbed into actual B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators. They took positions at the waist guns and turrets and fired at fabric sleeves towed behind other aircraft. Each student's ammunition was color-coded. After each mission, instructors counted the holes, tallied the hits, and gave immediate feedback. Week 6 was advanced aerial firing and final examinations. Students faced simulated attacks from multiple angles, practiced emergency procedures, and demonstrated proficiency in all defensive positions. The washout rate hovered around 20%. Those who made it through received their silver gunner wings and assignments to bomber crews. By July 7, 1943, 7 gunnery schools across the United States had graduated 19,789 gunners. By year's end, that number had reached 57,176. Las Vegas alone was producing 600 graduates every 5 weeks at peak capacity. The production machine ran at full capacity, but production wasn't the same as effectiveness. The real test would come over Europe, where German fighters waited. August 17, 1943. 27,000 feet above German soil. 376 B-17 bombers of the United States 8th Air Force droned toward their targets deep inside the Third Reich. The mission was ambitious and dangerous. Destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Destroy the Messerschmitt assembly plants at Regensburg. Cripple Germany's ability to build fighters and keep existing ones flying. The Luftwaffe had other plans. Over 400 German fighters rose to meet the American formation. Messerschmitt 109s screamed up from below. Focke-Wulf 190s dove from above. Messerschmitt 110 twin-engine fighters equipped with rockets made passes from beyond effective gun range. The German pilots employed new tactics specifically designed to overwhelm the bombers' defensive fire. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high, where the B-17 had minimal defensive armament. Attacks from 6 o'clock low, exploiting the limited firing angles of the ball turret. Devastating rocket attacks from beyond machine gun range. The air filled with smoke and fire, and the screams of engines pushed to their limits. What happened next shocked both sides. The American bombers lost 60 aircraft. 20% of the attacking force vanished in smoke and flames. Catastrophic losses that convinced many officers that daylight bombing without fighter escort was suicide. But the Germans also lost aircraft. Not the handful they'd expected, not 10 or 20. The American gunners, using position firing techniques learned at Las Vegas and the other gunnery schools, shot down approximately 27 German fighters. The initial claims were over 200 kills, exaggerated in the fog and chaos of combat, where multiple gunners often fired at the same target. But even the verified kills represented something unprecedented. American bomber gunners, when properly trained, could hit and destroy attacking fighters. Watch the waist gunners across the formation, applying the techniques learned in Nevada. A fighter attacking from 3 o'clock level, range approximately 300 yards, apply 12 radians deflection, aim between the fighter and the bomber's tail. Open fire in 3-round bursts. Observe strikes on the fighter's wing root and engine. The fighter breaks off smoking and disappears in a vertical dive. The technique worked precisely as the mathematics predicted. But the gunners also recognized something absolutely critical. Their initial instinct was always to aim directly at the target. They had to consciously force themselves to apply proper deflection. Training had to overcome instinct. Without the systematic instruction at gunnery schools, they would have missed. This was the key insight that the Schweinfurt raid proved beyond any doubt. Position firing wasn't natural. It violated every hunting instinct and every basic shooting principle that students brought with them. Only intensive, repetitive training could override those instincts in the chaos and terror of combat. Men who had spent 6 weeks shooting from moving platforms, tracking fighters on simulators, and firing at towed targets could force themselves to aim behind when every nerve in their bodies screamed to aim ahead. The Schweinfurt raid taught both sides valuable lessons. The Germans learned that massed bomber formations with properly trained gunners were far more dangerous than expected. Individual fighter attacks, even from advantageous angles, carried significant risk. The Americans learned that daylight bombing without fighter escort was unsustainable, despite good gunnery training. But the raid also validated the entire training program. Position firing worked. Gunners who applied proper deflection could hit fast-moving fighters in 3-dimensional combat. The investment in Las Vegas and the other schools had paid off. The next challenge was figuring out how to push these defensive systems even further. The solution arrived from an unexpected direction, across the Atlantic in Britain. Late in 1943, RAF night fighters began outfitting themselves with something remarkable, a device called the Mark II gyro gun sight. This ingenious mechanism relied on a spinning gyroscope, mirrors, and intricate mathematical calculations to work out the precise deflection angle needed for any kind of attack approach. All the pilot needed to do was place a moving crosshair on the target, and the equipment handled everything else. American military leaders saw the potential immediately. If gyroscopic sighting could work for fighter pilots, why couldn't the same principle be adapted for bomber gunners? Come November 1943, American technicians started modifying the British gyro sight concept to fit into bomber turrets. What emerged was the K-14 gun sight for fighters, with specialized adaptations created for turret mounting. The breakthrough was a dual reticle system. The first reticle stayed fixed, showing precisely where the guns were actually aimed. The second reticle, controlled by gyroscopic mechanics, displayed where bullets would genuinely land, taking into account how fast the aircraft was moving, what angle the guns were firing at, and basic projectile physics. When the aircraft flew straight and level, without any needed correction, both reticles sat directly on top of each other. The instant a gunner rotated his turret to track an approaching target, the gyro-controlled reticle shifted position, pointing exactly where to shoot. The gunner's only job was keeping that moving reticle focused on the target. The equipment automatically worked out the correct lead distance. Getting gyro sights into bomber turrets came with substantial obstacles. These devices were large, complicated, and demanded gunners to input the target's wingspan dimensions to judge distance. In actual fighting, when hostile fighters attacked from multiple directions at once, fiddling with wingspan settings and adjusting controls became nearly impossible. Regardless, gyro sights represented an enormous leap forward. Early 1944 trials demonstrated that gunners equipped with gyro sights hit their targets roughly twice as frequently as those using traditional ring and bead sights, even when both groups knew position firing methods. The automated calculations for deflection removed the exhausting mental work of mentally recalling firing charts and doing angular math in your head. By mid-1944, numerous American bombers were fitted with compensating sights, simpler automated systems that modified the aiming point by calculating deflection based on how the turret was positioned and what the bomber's airspeed and altitude were. While not quite as advanced as full gyro sights, these systems were much easier to manage during the chaos of combat. A gunner would input airspeed and altitude at the start of flight, then simply keep his sight on the target. The mechanism adjusted aim automatically. The difference in results was striking. Bomber crews outfitted with cutting-edge sighting equipment and gunners schooled in position firing techniques could destroy attacking aircraft at distances and angles that previously seemed impossible. Battle records documented considerable gains. Gunners who had struggled to get hits using basic equipment started successfully shooting down enemy planes just weeks after receiving compensating sights. By the final months of 1944, the Army Air Forces had updated their gunnery training program, drawing on 2 years of actual combat. The 6-week curriculum expanded to cover increasingly sophisticated material. Gunnery discipline and control, keeping gunners from shooting at their own fighters. Tactics education, learning how German fighters actually attacked. Response procedures for jammed weapons, broken turrets, and injured crew. One particular training method became wildly popular with instructors and trainees alike: Operation Pinball. The Las Vegas Army Airfield received 7 specially modified Bell RP-63 King Cobra fighters. These particular aircraft, nicknamed pinballs, had protective steel-aluminum armor coating their entire surface. Trainees fired special ammunition, frangible rounds manufactured from pressed leather powder and plastic that crumbled into powder on impact with solid surfaces. Every pinball plane contained electronic detection devices and a prominent red bulb mounted in the propeller hub. Each time a frangible bullet made contact, the red light activated. Trainees watched instantly as their shots connected. Just as importantly, pinball pilots executed realistic assault runs, performing dives and evasive maneuvers identical to German and Japanese fighter tactics. Trainees practiced tracking living aircraft executing actual combat moves, not stationary fabric targets moving along predictable flight paths. Results from the pinball program showed dramatic improvement. Students who trained against pinballs displayed 30 to 40% better accuracy rates in real combat than students who only trained on towed targets. The program expanded to all 7 Army Air Forces gunnery schools by early 1945. The most compelling evidence, though, came from examining real wartime data. As additional bombers received modern sights and more gunners finished advanced instruction, the strength of defensive fire climbed noticeably. Military intelligence specialists, tracking losses among German fighters attributed to bomber guns, observed an unmistakable upward trajectory from the middle of 1943 through the war's conclusion. though the numbers became complicated by the arrival of long-range fighter escorts, which significantly cut bomber losses and changed how air battles developed over Europe. From early 1944 onward, American P-51 Mustangs accompanied bombers all the way to Berlin and returned home safely. German pilots who once attacked bomber formations freely now faced American and British fighters, chasing them across their own skies. Nevertheless, the information was unmistakable. Bombers staffed with well-trained gunners equipped with modern sights shot down close to twice the number of attacking fighters compared to bombers crewed by inexperienced gunners with standard equipment. This doubling of effectiveness resulted from multiple contributors: improved instruction in position firing approaches, better sighting systems, stronger tactical coordination, and improved fire control. Yet underneath was the peculiar realization gained in Nevada's landscape. The Pacific region offered yet another arena for testing American gunnery methods. Japanese combat tactics departed markedly from German patterns. Zero fighters and Oscars valued exceptional turning ability above armor and striking power. They came from steeper perspectives, performed sharper curves, and regularly carried attacks to close quarters, depending on their nimbleness, to dodge enemy defensive shots. American gunners modified position firing approaches for these distinct circumstances. The B-29 Superfortress, active in the Pacific from the second half of 1944 onward, incorporated a cutting-edge remote-operated weapon system. Gunners occupied temperature-controlled cabins, managing turrets through periscope sights and computerized firing controls. This framework independently computed deflection, using information about target distance, assault angle, and plane velocity. B-29 gunners reflected afterward on this setup's remarkable performance. Japanese attackers typically rushed in from lower angles, attempting to strike from underneath the bomber stream. A gunner would get the target inside the sight's area. The machine would figure out range and deflection, then fire. Turrets swung into position automatically, barrels adjusted up and down. What remained for the gunner was monitoring the sight's targeting mark and pulling the trigger. The speeds made manual calculations impossible. The geometry was too intricate. Automation transformed defensive operations against Japan's most dangerous fighters feasible. The B-29's central firing system embodied the ultimate form of position firing's evolution. Humans handled finding and following the objective. Machines managed every ballistic equation: deflection, projectile drop, and air movement. This arrangement demonstrated remarkable lethality. When hostilities concluded in August 1945, the Army Air Forces had completed instruction for over 214,000 gunners at 7 dedicated gunnery colleges. By summer 1944, Las Vegas had graduated more than 44,000. These personnel had absorbed one central lesson: suppress their natural reactions, substitute faith in mathematical reasoning and physical law over gut feeling, and let their aircraft's momentum direct ammunition toward adversaries. Establishing an exact statistical measure proved complicated. Battle reports regularly overstated outcomes. Often multiple gunners fired simultaneously at a single opponent, each claiming responsibility. Gun camera recordings were minimal, particularly aboard bombers, where cameras couldn't monitor every defensive location. Records from German and Japanese military operations were incomplete, destroyed in air raids, or obliterated during surrender procedures. Still, examining obtainable facts suggested well-educated American bomber gunners achieved authentic hit rates, roughly double those of untaught gunners working with identical hardware. This enhancement originated almost entirely from grasping and executing position firing fundamentals. The tactic didn't transform gunners into superhuman marksmen, yet it made them proficient. Proficiency spelled the difference between living and perishing in the air. Wartime teachings at gunnery facilities shaped military aviation preparation for many years. During the Korean conflict, B-29 gunners employed modified position firing approaches in authentic battles versus advanced Soviet MiG-15 jets. Those basic rules kept working, even opposed to aircraft possessing far superior power than the slower bomber formations. Contemporary fighter jets still function around comparable mechanics. Electronic sighting mechanisms now handle deflection computation automatically, though the core physics hasn't shifted. Any item launched from a traveling vessel acquires that vessel's forward movement. Connection with a target demands accounting for personal momentum, beyond just the adversary's trajectory. The Nevada landscape housing the old Las Vegas Army Airfield has transformed into Nellis Air Force Base, accommodating the Air Force Fighter Weapons School and the Thunderbirds Aerial Demonstration Group. The previous ranges for gunnery practice vanished, supplanted by contemporary instruction infrastructure. Yet the fundamental realization encountered there, formulated over numerous training sessions in 1941 and beyond, stays anchored in United States defense strategy. Whenever stationary, direct your fire in front of motion. When traveling, shoot backward. The regulations of physics don't consider personal feeling. They react only to actuality. The German Air Force declined to universally implement position firing structure for their bomber defensive personnel. German instruction emphasized individual weapon competence and depended greatly on expertise. Fresh gunners picked up approaches from experienced soldiers through informal coaching rather than orderly systems. This approach functioned acceptably, while the Luftwaffe mostly engaged over its own regions with skilled crews. But when losses increased and experienced shooters fell, German bomber defense deteriorated dramatically. The Japanese military encountered comparable difficulties. Preparation for aerial gunners remained minimal and non-standardized. Position firing thinking existed within certain specialists, but never achieved widespread organized adoption. Japanese bomber formations suffered accordingly, experiencing defensive capabilities substantially below American performance levels. Britain initially pioneered numerous concepts forming the foundation of American position firing methods. However, British combat strategies took distinct paths. The Royal Air Force transitioned toward nighttime operations, lowering the importance of optical gunnery versus technological countermeasures and fighter coverage. The RAF installed gyro gun sights in certain planes, such as the innovative radar-equipped rear turret on Lancaster bombers. But they didn't establish the thorough instruction programs defining American schools. Just the United States blended methodical position, firing coaching with sophisticated sighting apparatus and mass production of specialized crews. This mixing generated bomber squadrons ready to safeguard themselves effectively without fighter protection. Though Allied fighters remained strongly preferred, the changeover from instinctive targeting to calculated deflection shooting marked a huge transformation in how humans master abilities. Over millennia, hunters and soldiers had mastered aiming straight at objectives or marginally forward for moving targets. Such approaches felt intuitive, transmitted readily, and succeeded in typical situations. High-speed flying in fast bombers shattered these conventional guidelines. Movement rates grew excessive, attack geometry too complicated, and the underlying science too absurd. Mastery required dismissing internal responses and relying on abstract numbers. Gunners had to have faith that positioning their AIM-12 aircraft widths behind an attacking fighter would achieve results, despite everything from prior shooting experience arguing against it. This psychological transition may have been the instruction program's crowning success. Not the installations constructed in the desert, not the high-tech teaching apparatus, yet the capability to reprogram human instinct to replace ages of evolved hunter and gatherer reactions with systematic methodology. The influence of WWII gunnery instruction surpasses the conflict itself. The organized technique for simplifying complex activities, the stress on recurring training to reshape fundamental inclinations, and the merging of hardware with human capability offered blueprints for military instruction globally. Contemporary fighter pilots absorb position firing rules during opening training phases. Labels have shifted, technical capabilities have progressed substantially, though the core idea persists. A projectile leaving a traveling vehicle gains that vehicle's motion. Successful engagement needs accounting for personal velocity alongside the objective's movement. By 1945, the American Armed Forces had established the world's most advanced aerial gunnery program. Blending thorough position firing training, top-tier targeting apparatus, and repetitive practical experience yielded gunners capable of protecting bombers against relentless fighter strikes. Success grew from grasping a surprising realization. When attacking fighters show up to your right, Diving at 300 mph, experienced gunners don't concentrate their fire on where the fighters currently sit. They don't track where they're heading, they shoot behind them. They target the space behind, believing their bomber's forward momentum will move ammunition directly into the fighter's flight route. They fight every instinctive response and execute what numbers demand. The instruction facilities shut down in September 1945 when fighting stopped and troops went back home. The Las Vegas site transformed into different purposes, eventually becoming Nellis Air Force Base. The trainers left for regular jobs, carrying expertise in educating an impossible discipline. The pupils vanished throughout the nation, forever impacted by their participation. Yet the realization endured, imprinted into military procedures, and kept in guidebooks affecting future air engagements. The realization that occasionally, staying alive means breaking every natural rule. That numerical accuracy defeats natural response. That rigorous coaching can reprogram thinking to run calculations more quickly than awareness. Bomber gunners trained to factor in their forward movement. They learned to shoot behind, and through mastering that single counterintuitive concept, they participated in winning humanity's deadliest worldwide conflict. Position firing ultimately conveys a message regarding human adaptability. Our capacity to master counterintuitive techniques, the force of organized teaching, to convert everyday folks into supremely capable experts functioning amid extreme difficulty. It's a narrative spanning numbers and equations, yet fundamentally addressing dependability. Reliance on educators' training techniques, contrary to instinct, assurance in technology that performed mathematics beyond conscious capability. Reliance throughout training that transcended countless years of biological inheritance. That reliance proved legitimate in the Pacific and European airspace, where skilled gunners eliminated hostile pilots that would have destroyed their squadrons, where comprehending deflection meant endurance. The desert landscape that fueled this advance presently accommodates the globe's most exceptional military pilot instruction. The Thunderbirds demonstrate flying feats that would have appeared impossible to those educating in 1942. The Fighter Weapons Institution shares tactics and methodologies that seemed unreal during the 1940s, yet a fundamental concept survives. Momentum influences bullet trajectory. Speed alters everything. Occasionally, success relies on positioning your aim away from your objective, depending on mathematics to merge ammunition and objective in the future. Bomber gunners mastered through demanding desert preparation and verified in genuine conflict across European and Pacific battlefields. They mastered suppressing their gut responses, embracing their training, and through comprehending one peculiar physics truth, they turned into World War II's most accomplished defensive gunners. Not owing to superior hardware, not owing to better equipment, yet owing to grasping fundamental science and possessing the resolve to follow it, regardless of what instinct advocated. The regulations governing physics disregard personal instinct. They acknowledge singular fact. And across World War II combat regions, the fact was position firing, a peculiar principle that rescued multitudes and aided triumph.